This week on Africa Update, we'll be going to Tanzania, rather, looking at the event that held place in Tanzania on the 27th and 28th of January 2025. That it is the Africa Energy Summit. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still tuned to Africa Update, reaching you on Trust TV in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, and I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafo. Now, the Mission 300 Africa Energy Summit took place in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania on January 27 to 28, 2025. This significant event brought together African heads of state, business leaders, development partners, and civil society to strategize on expanding electricity access to 300 million people across the continent by 2030, a goal known as Mission 300. Because the event was hosted by the government of Tanzania, the African Union, the African Development Bank Group, and the World Bank Group. The summit emphasized the urgent need for reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy to drive economic growth and development in Africa. During the event, several countries unveiled national energy compacts outlining ambitious targets and key reforms tailored to their unique contexts. Now, in addition to the Mission 300 Summit, the Africa Energy Summit is scheduled for May 2025. Now, we have so much to talk about on this episode of Africa Update, and in the studios with me to further discuss is engineer Chibueze Eke. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Sea Solar, and he was live and direct, as we always say in Nigerian parlance, at the Africa Energy Summit in Tanzania. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update today.
Thank you very much, Chamaka. I'm happy to be here.
Now, I'm going to ask you for first person's report. You were right there at the event. Tell us about your experience generally.
Okay, thank you very much. I think as a Nigerian, it was very, very exciting to be there in person, being that for us as a country, power has been a major challenge. And for us to understand Mission 300, I would like to walk from the bigger picture of Africa. Africa has about 1.2 billion people, and of those people, about half of them, or 600 million people, don't have access to reliable energy supply. So the whole essence of Mission 300 is simply to ensure that by the year 2030, the vision is to, by 2030, electrify at least half of those people who don't have electricity access. So that is where the 300 million out of 600 million comes from. So that's the Mission 300. How do you make sure that 300 million Africans who don't have energy access can actually get power supply within about 5 years? And what happens is that for you to achieve that, it's not going to be a one-person effort, because climate change affects the whole world. And as Africa, we need to come together to solve that problem. So about 24 African leaders, including our president, were in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to sign energy compacts, as you had mentioned. And what the energy compacts simply are basically a set of action plans for each country to commit to say, for us to achieve Mission 300, this is what it means for Nigeria, this is what it means for Tanzania, this is what it means for every other country that is part of this pact. And the African Development Bank, as well as the World Bank, as well as other mission partners, have been instrumental in ensuring that we all came together. And what is coming out of Mission 300, the Africa Energy Summit, is definitely going to go into next month's African Union meeting, where it will then be further taken, to a higher level, and action can actually be, monitored over time from the different countries.
Okay, now you've brought in the African Union, and this is where the heads of state and governments of all our African countries are now. What specific policies can these governments implement now to attract private investments in energy transmission? Because we need to have light. One of the four core major important things for any country or any nation to be able to do well, industrialize mostly, is electricity. So how can these governments help private investments come in?
Okay, thank you for that point. In terms of allowing private investment, now one key signal most investors look out for is the commercial viability of any market or any opportunity. In the case of Nigeria, as well as most other African countries, one thing you realize is that the actual amount of money we pay for power and the true cost of, what it gets, of what is needed to get power to people are two different things. Most times we pay less than what is required. So because we are mostly in that situation most of the time, you struggle to get the right investment coming in because nobody wants to be in a market where your selling price is lower than your cost price in that context. So what is happening now is that as part of the pillars that each country has committed to is to ensure that there is a cost reflective tariff for electricity.
So you're saying that we're expecting more increments
in other words, because if you think of Nigeria today and for example, the last Christmas period, over the years, most times during the Christmas period, we are struggling with, for scarcity, right? Long queues. There's always that issue of, because we are not paying the right price or it's not a market-driven product, we are struggling with supply. But imagine a situation where we go through the challenge of paying the right price. It doesn't mean that government cannot support in other ways to ease the pain on people. But if we can set the right signals to investors, they are definitely coming to invest in transmission and coming to invest in distribution, which are the two areas where, as a country, we are lagging. Because if it is generation capacity, we have about 12,000 megawatts, but what we get today on average is about 4,000. So we still need to unlock about 8,000 megawatts. And that means that the transmission and the distribution need more investments. And that's where, if we get it right with the price signals, we should expect that investments will flow. And before you know it, power supply issues become a thing of the past.
Okay, so we can see that the International Fund, IFC, announced a $1 billion fund with $70 million allocated for renewable energy in Nigeria. Now we're coming down to where I think you're well versed in. This fund, let's not look into Nigeria yet. The whole African continent. How is this being spread across to reach the over 50-something countries on this continent?
All right. So I know that different countries are at different stages of preparedness for funding, but I'll use Nigeria as an example. Nigeria has been able to, over the last 5 years, utilize funding from the World Bank, about $550 million, as well as African Development Bank, about $200 million, to ensure, especially mostly in the off-grid space, that we have mini grids, which are small solar solutions for communities that haven't had light before. We have solar home systems for people who just need small systems in rural communities. There has been investment in that space such that for about half of our population who don't have access to electricity, for the first time, these communities can, prove that, they have access to electricity for children to be able to study at night, women to be able to give birth at night, vaccines can be properly stored and refrigerated, and therefore it improves the healthcare sector, and so much more. And their livelihoods are actually improved because they can now process what they farm and earn more. So we've been able to judiciously utilize money that was, brought into the space through the World Bank and African Development Bank in the past. And what we are seeing now is that about $750 million is now available to take that impact to the next level. So as Nigeria's contribution to the Mission 300, we are already ready to make sure that more people are connected to electricity, like you said, because we cannot industrialize without electricity. Now, the interesting part is that while it's going to be happening off-grid in communities that don't have light, you're going to also see a lot of investments on the grid so that the grid can be more strengthened. The supply, which is really lacking, which is why we don't have light, can be, augmented, right? Especially through renewable energy sources like solar. And that's where companies like us come into the fray.
So I can see that one of the things that were talked about at the event was that gas should be come as a transition fuel, moving away from maybe the hydro dams and all that, and it's a very necessary component. Do you think that the African continent has enough gas? Because I know when we go to Europe, Russia actually, that's how they make money, is they give off their gas to other European countries, which they use to generate light for their countries. So now, do you think we have the right amount or quantity, rather, to be able to do this on the continent?
Oh, definitely. As a transition fuel, gas has a role to play. However, it's like you said, a transition fuel. It's not a fuel for the end goal, right? It's a fuel that will get us to where we want to be. Nigeria as a country, we want to participate in Mission 300, and we want to ensure that at least 60 million Nigerians are given access to electricity. So that's about 1/5 of your 300 million people in Africa. Now, we also want to, by 2060, ensure that we meet a net zero position. And what does net zero mean? Net zero simply means that if you check the amount of carbon you put into the air, and you check the effort you're kind of putting in to take away carbon, it's like a zero-sum game. Yeah, it kind of cancels out, right? So there's going to be a lot of work in terms of, while you've mentioned looking at the potential for gas, but also having a plan to transition such that in about 35 years' time, we have more cleaner and renewable energy sources than the ones that are not as clean, and therefore we are balancing out. So what you find out is, for us, getting the right investments for example, for gas, might be something that we would have to look more inwards to get that investment, because for the West and other parts of the world, everybody's looking inwards now to say, look, how do we ensure energy security for our country? How do we look at our people and make life is better for them? And a lot of funding is going to climate. A lot of funding is going to climate more than there's climate initiatives like renewable energy, hydro, which is also a clean energy source. And globally, people are carrying placards around the world saying, look, we want less of fossil fuels because it's causing flooding, it's causing global warming, and all the other issues associated. So as a country, we need to ask ourselves, while other countries are transitioning to electric vehicles and other things, how are we making sure that we are putting in place the right structures to benefit from the energy transition? And I know that in Africa, there are a lot of countries with oil and gas reserves. In fact, they say Nigeria is more of a gas nation than an oil nation. And other countries have gas, but the time we have to utilize gas might not be as much as we think, because if we've not done it all these years, I'm not so sure how much we can get to with gas in the next coming years. And we mostly have to fund most of those from our internal resources, whether it's the public side or the private side.
Okay, so now let's go back to renewable energy, and we see that at that event, it was said that transmission challenges are one of the issues that some of the countries in Africa have. However, Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa were, said to be cited as the successful reform models. Now, what did these three countries, or what are they doing differently to be able to have, harness renewable energy?
I would say, just like we definitely need to do in Nigeria, we need to think differently and we need to act differently. So what that means is we need to take very bold decisions as a country, and we need to be on a course that we can follow through as a country. Now, these countries have taken very, very bold decisions, and these decisions are mostly championed by the governments. So whether it's very large-scale solar farms that power cities, whether it's ensuring that the right government support financially in terms of subsidies are brought to the space, these countries have, over a long period of time, made such investments. I take, for example, the electricity sector reform in Nigeria. We borrowed a leaf from New Delhi in India, right? But over years, billions of dollars were invested consistently, and that's why India today is one of the big countries in the world, economically. But there was a deliberate effort over the years to support the power sector, because if you don't support that sector and make production competitive, you will not be able to export. China, the same thing. So most of these other countries that we are seeing, the government mostly just focused on making sure that power wasn't something that was too expensive. And like we are saying, it's a challenge for us, because on the one hand, people that have to invest in power need to recover the money, but then also government needs to come in and figure out how to ensure that Nigerians are paying for power and they're getting power supply when needed.
Okay, so now let's come back to Nigeria. We were seeing the current situation we have with electricity in our country, with these band A's, band B's, and all the bands up to whenever bands that we have. But yes, I know it's actually band E, but some people say we have up to band Z, where you don't have light at all. But Now, for me, my question mostly is this. How long can we do this? How long can we sustain this before we now go to everybody needs to pay? And the stories that says this whole thing about the bans and the money is because of the IMF is saying you have to do this, you have to do that. Do we actually really need to pay this much for electricity?
Well, electricity is one, I would say, commodity, or it's something that is not cheap around the world. A lot of us go to London, go to the United States, and we are mostly conscious about turning off the light when we're not in the room. If you come to Africa, go to countries like Kenya or even Tanzania, per liter of petrol, they pay more than us, even with our recent increase in prices, right? So maybe because we are, an oil-producing country, so the cost might not be as much, but for us as a country, we really, really need to understand that electricity is not free. It's something that needs to be paid for. And what that simply means is that if we need to take hard decisions in our benefit over the long run, most times we need to agree as a country that this is what needs to be done. The band A to band E, like you mentioned, was an initiative for us to at least get people in band A to pay a tariff that is close to cost reflective.
Oh, you're saying that this 200 and something naira for per kilowatt is not still cost reflective?
It is not, in the sense that by the time you even go to such an amount, right, you and I know, for example, the foreign exchange volatility. So you're almost playing a catch-up to ensure that each time the true cost of supplying power is reflective of the cost, because gas in the country is a dollar-based commodity. As long as gas prices are based in US dollars and we don't really have, let's say, much control on that, you have that effect, and the foreign exchange issues we have as well, right? So there can be a bit of mismatch, and that's the shortfall sometimes you see. However, we want to get to a place where, as much as we can, people should pay a fair price for fair supply, which is the band A to band E. But ideally, we should all get 24 hours light. Now, the only thing is that even with people that are paying band C, by the time you require them to pay 24 hours light, and they probably have to pay more per unit of light, it might not really work out easy for them. So other initiatives are needed to ensure that the burden is cushioned on the average Nigerian, such that we can still enjoy the benefit of having more light, but somehow we don't have to spend so much.
Okay, so now let's go back to the event that took place. Can you tell us some of the energy deals or agreements that were signed at that event and how they would impact the African continent? Okay,
so I would use Nigeria as a case study, right? For Nigeria, a couple of developers in the Nigerian mini grid space, which is a space where you use solar systems in rural communities to provide power, have already signed with the IFC, like you mentioned, for investment. Now, IFC is a private arm of the World Bank, and this is to support the work that the World Bank is already doing in ensuring that $750 million, which is not small money by today's standard, can be used to make sure that renewable energy is something that is now a major force to reckon with in power supply in Nigeria. Now imagine, in terms of the deals that were signed, like you mentioned, Nigeria has committed to ensuring that instead of the 20% roughly that renewable energy contributes to the energy mix, renewable energy should play a role of 50% in the energy mix. So imagine going from 4,000 megawatts today to a place where renewable energy is about half of it. What it simply means is we need to grow the energy supply from cleaner sources. And what that simply means is we need to think differently. We need to realize that even though we need to invest in gas, but we also need to invest in solar, hydro, wind, if possible, and we need to think large scale. So from large scale, what you understand is you need to have bigger projects. So imagine, for example, Jabi having a solar farm that powers Jabi during the day. Then at night, we get energy from the grid to provide power supply in Jabi. So that is the innovative thinking we have to force ourselves to come to terms with. In the north, you have so much solar radiation. How are we leveraging that in Kano, in Katsina, in Maiduguri? In the south, we have a lot of gas. How are we blending that with solar? In areas where you have wind, for example, in Castina, can we blend wind with maybe solar, for example? Because it's going to be expensive to truck gas there. So in energy mix, as a country, we are already looking at how to cascade what we have signed up to actionable plans, especially now that we have state laws for electricity and some states are trying to, take the step forward. How do we make sure that the states too understand the compact that we've signed up for?
All right, so now investments into this. How can African nations create more efficient regulatory framework for energy investments?
I would say one thing that African nations need to look at is really engagement. Now, when you say engagement, this is engaging with the people who are going to champion this from the government side, but also and most importantly, the customers. If you go to a restaurant, right, depending on how they engage with you, they welcome you, they greet you, they ask you whether your meal is going fine. You probably would be happy with the service, right? Maybe the food might not be the greatest, but you will be happy with that engagement. For us as Nigerians, I think Nigerians are reasonable people. I think that, with properly planned engagement, where you make sure that awareness is created, there's feedback mechanism, you'll be surprised that Nigerians can buy into anything that the government is proposing. Now, the challenge is in sticking to what you propose, because we've seen it time and time again where sometimes something is promised, but on the one hand, one party is not able to hold on to their own side of the bargain. So as long as that engagement is there and both parties can agree to what is expected, right, I think that we are coming to somewhere where investments can truly flow and we'll all be happy with power supply in the country.
All right, thank you so much, Engineer Chibueze Eke, for joining us on Africa Update today, giving us insights on the African Energy Summit that took place in Tanzania on the 27th and 28th of January 2025. It's been quite an informative conversation. Hopefully, people will start finding ways to. I know of an office that have actually gone off the grid. Everything is solar powered. Everything is solar powered while they're there, and all that. So maybe we can start finding ways to do this to equally help our climate. Now we're going to shop break. When we come back, we'll go to Kenya to see what conservationists are doing to help the planet. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us here on Africa Update on Trust TV. Now, conversationists, or rather conservationists in Kenya, are using an artificial intelligence-powered application to monitor forest degradation and launch reforestation. The data collected by the application is also used to project the amount of carbon that can be stored by a growing patch of forest. Juma Majanga reports from Nyeri, Kenya for the VOA.
Cedric Kiplimo is assembling his artificial intelligence-powered stereoscopic camera at Dedan Kimathi University of Technology in Kenya's Central Region. Next, he will head out to collect data.
We really do not have granular data on forests. Developed nations usually have things called national forest inventories, which are essentially huge collections of data sets on forests, individual measurements of these trees from sample plots and so on. In Africa, we don't have that.
So Kiplimo is trying to change that with the help of an AI-powered application called Tree Vision. Tree Vision uses stereoscopic images of trees to provide a three-dimensional understanding of the area. It does this by generating data on trees' height, diameter, and other features. It also indicates the level of degradation in a given area. This information can be used to inform reforestation efforts and monitor the growth of trees in reforested areas. The app can also project the amount of carbon that can be stored within a growing patch of forest. All this will make the work of conservationists much easier.
If you can take away some of the burdensome tasks that they may have to do and make them automate some of them and also be able to capture data more easily, it allows them to monitor larger areas and then save their time to maybe to implement on interventions.
The Global Forest Watch says Kenya lost about 8% of its humid primary forest or old-growth rainforest over the past 2 decades. And that in part led to a 12% decrease in Kenya's total tree cover. Conservationists say human activities contributed to that loss.
A lot of our people out there resort to harvesting trees, probably for charcoal or timber or something else in order to survive. The other losses experienced is the kind of land use that is happening. A lot of people are clearing even very marginal areas to do farming.
The Kenyan government launched a campaign in late 2022 to plant 15 billion trees by 2032. James Mwangombe says innovations like Tree Vision can help Kenya reach that target.
Such innovations would be very welcome because they'll cut down on cost, both labor and actual finance, as compared to when you have officers on the ground to go and do the actual counting and assessments.
As Kenya works to restore its lost tree cover, Kiplimo hopes his innovation can help restoration efforts succeed.
Wow, that's very, very inspiring over there in Nyeri, Kenya. It's been quite a very informative and educative episode on Africa Update this week. And thanks again to my guest in the studio, Engineer Chiweze Eke, who was talking to us about the Africa Energy Summit that took place in Tanzania. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream for more news programs and documentaries. Bye for now. My name is Chiamaka Nwafo.